Welcome to Destination Michigan. We celebrate the people and places that make Michigan a great place to live. Sit back and enjoy tonight's edition of Destination Michigan.
Support for Destination Michigan is provided by the CMU Bookstore. T-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, maroon and gold memories, and an official outfitter of Adidas apparel at the Central Michigan University owned and operated CMU Bookstore. Online shopping 7 days a week at cmubookstore.com. The CMU Bookstore, online at cmubookstore.com, on campus in the University Center, and game day locations at Kelly Short Stadium and the CMU Events Center. And by Country Smokehouse in Elmont, offering a selection of gourmet meats including homemade sausage and jerky. Also available, custom catering and weekend outdoor barbecues. Information at countrysmokehouse.com.
Tonight on Destination Michigan.
The real trick is to get to the fire on time. The first 3 minutes at the fire are more important than the next 3 hours.
Sound the alarms. We're jumping on board a big red fire truck and heading to the Michigan Firehouse Museum in Ypsilanti.
It's important to preserve your history so that you know what your predecessors have done.
We explore the sunrise side at the Iosco County Historical Museum in East Tawas.
Hi, I'm Bob Garner. Tonight on Destination Michigan, we are headed to the little town of Frankenmuth to go to one of my favorite attractions up there, Bronner's Christmas store.
Hello and welcome to Destination Michigan. To kick off tonight's episode, we're going to sound the alarms, jump aboard a big red fire truck, and head to the Michigan Firehouse Museum. Our tour guide is Courtney Brooks.
Thanks, Kurt. The Michigan Firehouse Museum showcases the history of the fire service. Displays of collectibles and fire engines fill its almost 30,000 square feet. Ypsilanti's original fire station from 1898 is the home of the museum, and it has an addition in order to educate visitors about the fire service of long ago.
The real surprises are in the old part of the building.
Over 100 years ago, located at the highest point in town, the original Ypsilanti Firehouse contained firefighters and horses with hook and ladder wagons. Today, the firehouse is a museum with displays to match its history. With an 1887 steam pumper and hose cart, an original 1860s fire extinguisher wagon, and horse hitches. Plus, there's an authentic brass pole to represent the importance of a 3-minute speedy arrival to community fires.
The real trick is to get to the fire on time. The first 3 minutes at the fire are more important than the next 3 hours. If we can get the fire out in the first 3 minutes, we've really done our job, which is why they give them the right of way on traffic, right? A light and a siren and everything. As you save more houses, the quicker you get there. This building is built on what was the highest point in town, so every run was a downhill run. They didn't care how long it took to get the fire engine back to the firehouse. But if we could get there in 3 minutes or less, we had a good chance of saving the house. And so the brass pole, the horse hitches were all hung from the ceiling so that they could drop straight down. They all clipped underneath the horse. And so it was very, very speedy to get that steamer going.
An additional building was attached to the original firehouse in 2002 to highlight these steamers and even more fire service history. This building includes 30 fire rigs on display at any given time, a rotation of the 72 there are in storage. Matt Lee, the curator of the Michigan Firehouse Museum, takes us on a tour of the museum's historic fire pumps, steamers, and engines.
We always like to start out with the hand pumpers. In 1830, this fire truck would have showed up with 75 firemen you had 12 guys pumping the handles, and they call them brakes because they'll break your back after a while if you let it not do it. And it'd be 4 minutes on and 4 minutes off. And so you had 12 guys on each side going back and forth. After about 4 minutes, there'd be a change and 12 more guys. Plus you needed the hose man and the ladder man. And so the normal fire department at the time would have had 75 people in it. When the Civil War started and the cities lost their manpower, and so steamers really took over because you could replace 75 fellows with a hand tub with 5 guys on a steamer. Then the next evolution beyond the steamer, because you needed a professional boiler operator to operate the boiler, was to actually have a little gasoline engine do it. So along around 1910, 1920, they went to gasoline-powered fire engines and then dieselized from the 1960s on up through current. The gasoline-powered fire engine evolved over time to the point where putting out 1,000 gallons a minute is no problem. We have here a 1916 fire engine from Battle Creek, which puts out 1,000 gallons a minute. Now that's hard to envision until I tell you put 1,000 milk jugs out there and I'll fill them all in a minute. Right? That's a lot of water. A smaller community might have 500 gallon a minute pump. So the fire chief decided on what kind of building he had, how much money he had to spend, and put the two together, and that's the kind of fire engine he got. And that's why when you go through a fire museum, almost every piece of equipment looks different because every chief had a different size checkbook. As long as he had enough money in his checkbook, he could order all the bells and whistles he wanted.
Speaking of bells and whistles, there are several permanent displays of collectibles throughout the museum. There are 25 fire engine bells from each manufacturer.
This is from 1920 to 1960, little sharper ring.
A collection of light bars from over 60 years. Historical fire extinguishers. Hundreds of Smokey the Bear items, as well as hats, helmets, and badges from departments all over Michigan. As you can see, the museum showcases Michigan fire memorabilia as often as it can. And of course, there's a story to go with each one. For example, this 1936 fire apparatus from Detroit that set the stage for OSHA's national fire truck regulations, 60 years ahead of its time.
There was a fireman that died of hypothermia in Montreal in 1935, and it made big headlines, and so people started putting up windshields. The city of Detroit actually did a fully enclosed pumper in 1936, and over a period of time built 74 of them. They decided that every fireman had to be inside and sitting down, and that became an OSHA standard 60 years later. Everybody had to be inside and sitting down. So Detroit was 60 years ahead of time on that one. But still the pump was about the same size, 1,000 gallons a minute, because it was all fed by the same fire hydrant system, which stayed about the same size. Early on in Detroit, they didn't have sirens. In fact, they only had 3 trucks with sirens on them until 1952. They used whistles, and it sounded like a boat was behind you. So it like blasted you out of the way, much the way they do it with air horns today. You get a couple of trucks in Detroit on their way to a fire, each one blowing a whistle like a lake freighter. You actually cleared the streets fairly quick.
But the number one question everyone asks is, why are fire trucks the color red?
Most fire trucks are red today, and there's a reason for it. When we start out talking about fire trucks made in any kind of mass production, we're back in the 1830s. And red in 1830s was usually cherries and fruit, and they would get the dye from that, and it wasn't a powerful dye. And then they decided, and they would take antimony and they would capture the fume off the antimony, and it created a purple, a deep purple. And then they could get that down into a red. And that happened around 1860. So if you had a volunteer fire company and your stuff was all red and yellow, and the neighboring company had red, red's very expensive. Even if you go today and you got a car and you're going to paint your car red, a gallon of red paint's $100 more than a gallon of any other color, because the way to get the dye is still very, very expensive. So back then, if you had red, then people said, wow, this fire company has money, and maybe they're the ones I should join, right? And so I called red a chick attractor. The girls went down there where all the guys with the money were, and it stuck. So if you had an upscale fire department, you had red apparatus. And then the other thing was, it's the most expensive portable piece of equipment the city owns. So always leading the 4th of July parade is the fire truck with all its gold trim and decoration, because it's the city's way of showing off.
The Michigan Firehouse Museum is self-funded by Howard and Norma Weaver in honor of Howard's father, who was the only Ann Arbor fireman to die in the line of duty. The museum also hosts events, meetings, and tour groups. For more information, feel free to visit the museum website, michiganfirehousemuseum.org.
Thanks, Courtney. Our next stop takes us to my old stomping grounds. My hometown of Hale is one of the small but vibrant communities in northeast Michigan's Iosco County. With the Asable River meandering through and a crystal clear inland lake seemingly around every corner, Iosco County is one of Michigan's hidden gems. The county seat is Tawas City on the shores of Lake Huron. And tonight we venture up US 23 to explore Iosco County's Historical Museum. Our tour guide is Sarah Adams as we head to East Tawas in beautiful Iosco County to continue tonight's edition of Destination Michigan.
If you're like me, maybe you've never seen one of these in person before. Or this. Or something like this. Something many of us have only seen in television shows like Downton Abbey. Fortunately, though, the folks at the Iosco County Historical Museum have all of these pieces of the past, and so much more.
I think the museum does an awesome job of telling you who the people are that live here. It is the people that really make the history, you know, what they do to earn a living, why they have chosen to come here.
All of these museum rooms tell different parts of Iosco County's history.
We do have a lot of the lumbering artifacts. We have a room that is dedicated to CCC camp. That is of particular interest to me because my dad was camp director of the CCC camp in Gordon Creek in the 1930s. One of the favorite places for people that come in is our old graduation photos. So it's interesting to have young people come in to see their parents or their grandparents as young people and see their graduation pictures and so forth.
Probably my favorite room is the Neil Thornton Archives room. The archives room now holds all the newspapers. There's funeral records back there, and there's just maps and just about anything you think of.
The Neil Thornton Archives room was named after this man. He was the first president of this historical society, but his interest in the stories here in Iosco County started long before that.
I grew up in a newspaper office. I was born over a newspaper office. My father owned the Tawas Herald, and my brother and I took over the Tawas Herald in 1946 when he came home from the military.
The newspaper business gave Mr. Thornton the opportunity to get to know the area's history pretty well.
If you're a newspaper man, every story you write, you're making a comparison quite often. And you have to look back in your back files on the newspaper. You may have to go back 20, 30 years to find some information. And so we had a very good file on our newspaper.
Soon this interest in area history turned into preserving area history.
The Iosco County Gazette, the last publisher of the Gazette, turned all the files over to me before she died at 94 years old, I think she was. So I preserved those and I put them in the museum here.
But the files aren't the only things preserved in the Neil Thornton Archives room. These are glass negatives, and they used to be what photographers developed pictures from.
East Tawas had an excellent photographer by the name of Ard Emery. His wife became ill, and they had to return to her home in Tennessee. So when they moved Why, he left his entire collection in the Barkman building, where he had his studio. Abraham Barkman, he took all of the plates back to his sawmill. They were in big wooden boxes, all nailed shut tight. In our collection, we have 3,500 glass plates and they're all identified with the name on them, which is very unusual. Anytime I ever talk to people about photography, I say, put the name and the date on the back of the print. Otherwise, down the road, it won't mean a thing to anyone. Now, that's easy for me to say, because I don't do that myself.
But what Mr. Thornton is doing is helping to preserve the history of his hometown. And as time marches on, that can present certain challenges.
Museums, unless they have people who are interested in financing it, you have a very difficult time.
And the reason museums are important? Well, it goes back to those things we saw at the beginning of our visit to this museum. This dress, this phonograph, and this. This is a switchboard.
When you get some young people, some kids in here, and try to explain what that is, they look at you as though you dropped from the moon, because they have no concept that you could possibly have had to plug wires in order to connect. And it's almost like a different language that you have to try to use to say, in the old days.
But places like this, with mementos from the so-called old days, also serve another function.
Among other things, when we live in a society that is less rooted than it used to be, and we travel broadly and live in many different places, to have a sense of rootedness, to have a sense of one's origins, and to see that that can help us to orient ourselves as to where we came from, even if we don't live here now. And I think that history is an important part of that, and the museum tries to establish that rootedness that we all need, whether we live or move or are quite mobile.
I wish I could remember what other people have said about if you don't know your history, you don't know anything about yourself or the present or the future. But it's important to preserve your history so that you know what your predecessors have done, and you'll find out that they're the same kind of people that you were. And down the road, somebody's going to say, well, there's old Neil Thornton, he's 85 years old, now look at that now. But I remember when all of the old people in town, I was a little kid, and I'd look up to them. So it's just a continual process.
As a young lad growing up in Hale, I was fortunate to have had Neil Thornton take my picture a few times for the Old Tawas Herald. And I can highly recommend any one of Neil's many books that he has written about the history of the area. You can learn more about the Iosco County Historical Museum by visiting ioscomuseum.org. Our final stop tonight will have you believing in the jolly old guy with the white flowing beard and the big red suit who visits your house on that special day in December. Yes, you will believe in Bob Garner. Okay, his beard isn't so white and he might not stop by every December, but the jolly part is all true. Tonight, Bob visits his old friend Wayne Bronner, who used to be a wildlife biologist. Today, Wayne Bronner is the president and CEO of Bronner's Christmas Wonderland. To Frankenmuth we go, to the world's largest Christmas store that will have you believing in the jolly old man as we visit Bronner's Christmas Wonderland.
The town of Frankenmuth is a place where the Christmas spirit is kept up full steam for 361 days a year. Started by Wally Bronner some 68 years ago, this great big old Christmas store has expanded and grown under the watchful eye of the Bronner family since 1945. For years, Wally could be seen in his red jacket, greeting customers and smiling at the folks who came to visit. Unfortunately, Wally has passed on, leaving the store's top spot to one of my favorite folks, Wayne Bronner. Some of you might remember Wayne as the DNR's upland bird specialist who played a big role in introducing wild turkeys to southern Michigan. Wally Bronner didn't start this store out big, but the store today is immense. In fact, it's the world's largest. So Wally, your pop, okay?
Yes.
Your dad, the guy that founded all this, he didn't start out big. He started out actually in somebody's basement, right, as a sign painter?
Very humble beginnings, Bob. My father originated as a sign painter, and as you inferred, he painted in my grandfather's basement, so they always knew where he was. And he originated as the business here as a sign painter and gradually evolved into painting Christmas panels, which he sold to the city of Clare, and then other people saw the Christmas panels in Clare. They liked what they saw. They inquired who made those. They said it was a sign painter in Frankenmuth, and the rest is history.
And the place is so big now, you've got to use a bicycle to get around for the most part?
That's the fastest mode of transportation to get from one end of the building to the next. We hop on bicycles and make the transition.
Okay, the main departments in Bronners. Can you list them off?
Well, Bronners is very obviously a retail store. That's
right.
what we see around us here. We have 50,000 items from around the world. We also have a wholesale division, and we sell each year to about 1,000 different accounts. That's because we buy in such large quantities, and many of the items that we have produced are done on an exclusive basis. So that gives us a niche where we're able to sell to wholesale on a wholesale basis. We also have a catalog and an internet operation. We mail about 4 million catalogs across the United States. Have a website that has about 7,000 different items on it. And just to put it in perspective, we'll peak out at about 750 people on the payroll, and about 225 of those are involved in the catalog and the internet fulfillment end of it. So then the fourth operation that we have would be our commercial sales department, and that's the department where you have sales representatives that go around selling larger decor to shopping malls, to downtowns, to chambers of commerce and so forth.
Wait, you've got a division too that even supplies props for movies.
That they do. We've sold Christmas decorations to about 50 different titles. Jack Frost was one of them. We had another one that was called Jingle All the Way, Serendipity, Spider-Man 2.
Spider-Man 2?
Spider-Man 2, Deck the Halls, and The Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
Oh, he's a mean one, Mr. Grinch. And it's so good to see you, Wayne, in your red jacket like your dad always wore. How did that tradition come about?
Well, Wally always wore a red jacket, and he figured he really stood out from the crowd when he wore a red jacket. He would make jokes that when he stood by the door, sometimes people would give him tips because they thought he was the butler there. So on my first day here at Bronners, he got me fitted with a red jacket, and that's our uniform.
Wayne, I got one question I've got to ask you, and if you choose not to answer it, well, I guess I won't think ill of you, but I really want to know something. Right after Thanksgiving, you bring in Santa Claus here, right?
Santa Claus.
Yeah. What I want to know is that really Santa Claus, or is it one of his helpers?
We have the real Santa Claus here, and that's why so many kids delight in seeing him each year.
On your next trip to Frankenmuth, stop by and enjoy the holiday season all year long. To learn more about the world's largest Christmas store, visit Bronners.com. And that is a wrap for tonight. But join us again next time for another edition of Destination Michigan.